Hello everybody, my name is Kat and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things horror. Happy spring! You know that it's spring and Easter time because we are getting all of the religious horror films within the next 2 weeks. We have Immaculate, which we're talking about today, and then The First Omen, which is coming out a couple of weeks from now. So yes, I'm giving my review of Immaculate today, which follows a young nun played by Sweeney, who joins a convent in Italy, and right from the get-go, things are just off at this convent. And within a few days of being there, she mysteriously becomes pregnant. And the conclusion that the priests and the nuns come to is that she has become impregnated by Jesus himself. But again, it becomes clear that there is something much more nefarious going on here and with this baby. Whenever I see a horror film featuring nuns, my first thought always is, I hope that this is something like Ken Russell's The Devils. If you are in the mood for like a religious horror film that's also a little bit on the art house side, but that's also really bonkers and just really goes for it, if you have not seen The Devils, I highly recommend it. Now, did Immaculate live up to the greatness that is Ken Russell's The Devils? No. It did not. But that's okay, it doesn't need to be The Devils. That's just my own personal preference if I'm in the mood for watching a film of nuns gone wild. Anyway, Immaculate is not that. So what is it? I found this movie to be okay. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it either. There were certain things about this movie that I really liked. I really enjoyed the aesthetic of it. I thought the look of the convent was very beautiful. It had that old Italian architecture look to it. So I enjoyed being in that space. I enjoyed being in the setting. I thought they did a really good job of making it both very beautiful, but you can just tell that there's something off about it. You know, for the first act, I was really into it. This is a story that we've seen before, right? This is a story about a young girl who is taken out of her familiar environment and then put into this new setting, whether, yes, it's a convent or it's a cult of some kind, or it's just some sort of like weird community like we see with Midsommar, for example. She's kind of put into this new environment and then has to learn the rules of the community. What are the group norms here? And I thought the film did that pretty well. I wish it had leaned into that a little bit more. I really enjoyed the scenes of Sydney Sweeney's character. I always forget their names. Cecilia. Sister Cecilia, that's her name. There are a few scenes where we get to see Cecilia trying to assimilate into the environment, right? She's learning about the convent, she's learning what the nuns do on a day-to-day basis. And I was enjoying that because that's a world that I'm not familiar with. So I enjoyed watching her trying to be a part of this new family that she has been adopted into. And again, I wish the film had leaned a little bit more into that and had maybe allowed us to watch her enjoying being in this surrounding. I will say one other positive that I will give this film is that it's a tight story. It's only an hour and a half. So I appreciate that the film moves quickly. That being said, I wish it had like pumped the brakes a little bit and allowed a little bit more breathing room for us to get to know Cecilia more as a character before it throws her into all of the horror. Overall, I felt like this film lacked confidence. That's the only way I can think of to describe it. Like, it just felt like it lacked confidence in both the directing and the writing. It's a film that's like an awkward teenager that doesn't really know who they are yet. And so they're just trying on these like different identities and scooping up personality traits from like other kids and just trying to like awkwardly figure out who they are. That's what this movie kind of felt like. It kind of felt like it was relying on a lot of different tropes all at once and relying on the fact that we as audience members are going to recognize these tropes and understand what's happening to help propel the story forward and keep it moving. The problem is that it just relies on the tropes, it just shows the tropes, but then it doesn't really do anything new or different with them or try to, I don't know, I guess subvert them in any kind of way. To me, watching it, this film felt like a mixture of, yes, religious horror combined with an Ari Aster movie, combined with something like Hostel, combined with Jurassic Park, combined with David Cronenberg body horror. When you're describing it like that, right, this is a film that's kind of bringing in all of these elements together. Like, it sounds awesome, right? But again, it like shows these elements, but then it doesn't really push them or go far enough with them. I'll give some examples of what I'm talking about, and I'm not going to spoil the film here. Do I think this is a film that's good enough for you to go out to the theater and spend your money on? Not really. I would probably say wait for streaming. Okay, but just to give some examples of what I mean and how I think this film is relying too heavily on the tropes. You have the very obvious stuff, right, where she's coming into this convent, and the one way that they let you know right away that something is amiss, that something dangerous is gonna happen, is you have Sweeney, Cecilia looking out the window, and then you have a bird that flies into the window. It falls on the ground, it falls on the windowsill, and she's just looking at it, and then we have this close-up of this like dead bird covered in blood, just like withering. That's something that we've seen before. We've seen that in countless horror films before, the bird flying into the window. That's not really new imagery. And given the fact that we're in a setting which you have all this kind of religious objects and all this kind of religious symbolism, there's also some stuff going on with Cecilia that I'll talk about in a second with her character that I think could have also lent to maybe some weird like psychological stuff going on with her where you're not really like sure if what she's seeing is real or not. I feel like there were opportunities to maybe explore more creative options for showing that something's just like not right at this convent. Like, again, the bird scene happened and I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, seen it before. Another example is the use of body horror in this film. So there's two distinct examples of body horror in this movie. There's a torture aspect to it. They set this aspect up pretty early and what these nuns are doing to some of the young women that are coming into this convent. There's maybe like 2 or 3 scenes of torture, and I'm talking like torture, like again, something you might see in a Hostel movie, which again sounds cool. That's something that I don't think we've seen before. Nuns doing a Hostel-like torture, that would be up on the same level as Ken Russell's The Devils. But again, it's not really that. It's like these very brief scenes where we see it, and it kind of feels like these scenes are there as, again, just these shock and awe moments rather than really being connected to the story, because we see the scene happening, we see the torture happening, and then that's it. The movie moves on and it never brings up those characters again or what those nuns were doing. It's kind of weird because nobody questions that, you know, these young women are going missing. And you could make the argument like, oh, well, it's because they all know what's happening here. But they don't, because there's like a whole group of young women that are coming in that do not realize what is happening at this convent and what these nuns are doing in their spare time. So it's kind of sloppy writing like that, where like they're setting it up and they're showing it, and then it's like, okay, moving on, forget about that. It's like, wait, what's going on with these nuns? Why do they think it's okay to be torturing people? Like, I want to know what's going on here. So there are some things in the film that for me felt like just kind of loose ends. So you have that, and then you have this other thing where Cecilia being pregnant, obviously there's something very wrong going on with her pregnancy. It's a very Rosemary's Baby type scenario. And the further that she's getting along in the pregnancy, she starts to have these bodily changes. For example, there's one scene where she is vomiting and then she notices that her teeth are starting to fall out. There's another scene where she's in a confessional and her nails are getting like gross and infected. And then there's just the close-up shot of her like peeling the nail off of her finger. Again, this is imagery that we've seen before. It's imagery that we've seen in a lot of body horror, which again would be fine if the film had pushed out a little bit more or had run with it a little bit more. For the most part, she's fine. And for the most part, she looks fine as well. Sweeney remains beautiful throughout this movie. There's only these quick shots of like bodily decay. And again, because it's stuff that we've seen before, it's just not that shocking. It's just like, yeah, okay, gross. And if they were going to go that route, I would have liked them to, yeah, I don't know, maybe really go hardcore on the body horror and really just show her like changing and show the fact that this entity that's inside of her is literally sucking the life out of her. Like, have her just completely decompose the further along this pregnancy goes, because that would also lead to more motivation for her character to want to get this baby out of her. I'm going to come back to her character motivation in a second, but I felt like for most of the film, again, she kind of remains the same, both like physically and emotionally and within her goals as a character. It's just kind of like one note. And so I feel like there was something where, yes, this baby is killing her. She needs to get it out. She needs to go to a hospital. She needs to get outside of this convent, and probably added more suspense to the film and the eventual conclusion that it takes. So these are all examples that I mean when I say like the film is lacking confidence. Like, it has a good story, it has a good premise, but it seems like the filmmakers didn't quite know how to execute some of these ideas. Because they didn't know how to execute it, it was like, okay, let's just rely on imagery that, again, we've seen in horror films and is the typical like horror movie imagery. They're not the first filmmakers to do this. Horror is a genre that very much relies on the same tropes and the same type of imagery. But I think the reason why it's so distracting here is because it's not actually pushing these tropes or really grabbing onto them. Like, I wish it had kind of picked a lane and been like, okay, we're gonna go like torture body horror route, or we're gonna go for more like slow kind of character driven story, like an Ari Aster type film. You could have a very slow burn character story that then devolves into like this very grotesque body horror. That would have been cool to see, especially again within this setting. But again, just felt like the film didn't know what it wanted to be. So the filmmakers were just kind of cherry picking what they thought would look cool or creepy or gross. But again, it all comes off a bit shallow and without like intention or purpose. And look, for some people that's going to be fine. For some people, they are going to be able to watch this film and be like, yep, cool, I'm into it. There were two women that were sitting next to me in the theater when I was watching it, and they had their hands covering their mouth and their eyes for the majority of the third act. So for them, it worked. For someone like me that's been watching horror films their whole life, I found it a little boring in parts. I also couldn't tell if the film wanted to have a sense of humor or not. There were definitely moments where characters had one-liners, and it was very clear that it was supposed to be funny. Again, it kind of fell flat. I didn't really hear anyone in the audience laughing, and again, I think that's because the tone is weird. Again, it goes back to this thing I was just talking about where, you know, they don't really know what kind of movie they want to be. I think the attempts at humor is where I was getting like the Ari Aster vibes the most. Parts of this film very much feel like it wants to be similar to Midsummer or Midsommar, however you say it. There are certain like visual cues that feel very similar, right? There's that whole like shot when she's dressed up in like the Virgin Mary regalia and she's just like crying as everyone is around and like praising her and worshiping her. That felt like it wanted to be a moment very similar to what we see at the ending of Midsommar with the character of Danny, and she has the whole flower dress and all of that. So you had those moments, and then also in the sense that it wanted to be a serious, scary horror film, but also have these moments of like dry comedy, not like slapstick comedy or any of that, just like humor arising from very absurd situations. Again, you see this in Midsommar. Love or hate that movie, one thing that I think Ari Aster does very well in Midsommar is combining like the eeriness with these very dry moments of humor. He balances that very well in that film. Immaculate did not balance its humor well with its more serious parts, but it felt like it wanted to. It was trying. It was trying. I could see that they were trying to make something that was both creepy and funny and entertaining. It just needed a little bit more finessing. I was listening to an interview with the director and Sydney Sweeney. It seems like this is very much a project that Sydney Sweeney was really getting behind and really using her star power to make, which is cool. But they did say that they had to make it fairly quickly because of her shooting schedule, and I feel like that's where the problem with this film was. Like, I feel like if they maybe had a little bit more time, a little bit more time to kind of slow things down and really think about how they wanted to approach the material that was in the script. Again, just doing a little bit more finessing, I think they probably would have solved a lot of these problems that I'm bringing up. Speaking of Sydney Sweeney, as far as her acting goes and her presence as a leading lady or a final girl, again, I thought she was okay. She definitely has very strong moments of acting, but like I said before, I felt like her character was very one note throughout the entire movie. The film sets up that her character is a woman of faith. She's always been a woman of faith. You find out that she had a near-death experience, and in the confusion of that experience and being revived and literally coming back from the dead, she turned to God, which I think is good character motivation. The problem is that while she says she's a woman of faith, the movie doesn't really show us that. We never have scenes of her where, right, she's just like in her room and reading the Bible, for example. I am not someone that is familiar with the Christian Catholic religion, so I don't know. I'm going off the assumption that if I were to be called to become a nun, give up everything and give myself to God, to serving God, then yeah, I imagine I would be spending my time like reading the Bible and researching things and exploring the convent that I'm in and wanting to spend time with the older nuns and having them like teach me stuff and how can I serve God better. But we don't get any of that with her character. There are some points in the film where you see like Bible verses, they're written in Italian on the bedroom walls, for example. And she sees them and then she has to go to the Bible and look up what those passages are. It's written in Italian, it's on the wall, and then it's like John 24:6 or whatever the numbering system is. What I've been told by the people that I went to go see the movie with who are more knowledgeable of Catholic religion than I am is that the verses that are on the walls are pretty like standard Bible passages. Like they're passages that any good like Catholic Christian who's been to Sunday school would know. She doesn't know them. Like she has to look up what the passage is and what it means. So it's kind of one of those weird things where it's like, if you're such the woman of faith that you claim to be, wouldn't you like know what these passages are? I mean, I get it. I know that they need to like show it and have her say it for us, the audience, to understand. But it's just things like that that come off a little weird, that she's supposed to be such a woman of faith, but then there's these very like basic things about the Bible and the religion that she doesn't know. Again, I'm only bringing this up because if it was a thing where she was coming in and she was like, yeah, I had this accident and now I'm just not really sure like who I am or where I'm going and I'm looking to God for advice. Like if she's just kind of getting into it, then that would be more forgivable, but they're setting her up as a character that has been in a convent before, has been studying the Bible, and has been serving God since this accident that she had when she was like 12 years old. So she's been doing it for quite a number of years now, and it seems like she should be more knowledgeable in like the religious symbols and the Bible verses than what she is. Because it was also a thing of like, if I'm a woman of faith and I've somehow become pregnant with God's baby, like as an extreme woman of faith, is that something that I would be happy about or elated about, even if it is kind of scary? Like, I don't know. I don't really know what her reaction to becoming pregnant is. And that's the other thing too. Again, she says that she has a close relationship to God. So one would think that being put in a very strange situation like this, that she would be turning to God and asking him like, hey man, what's going on here? But she doesn't do that. We never get any scenes of her talking to him. We get a little bit of her praying. But again, it feels like a thing where if you're setting up her character as this woman of faith, why is she not turning to God in the moment where things start to fall apart for her? So I felt like if they had maybe added a little bit more to her character and a little bit more exploration of her faith and her relationship to God, and like how is she understanding these things? How is she seeing them? How does she incorporate them into her daily life? I felt like that would have made her character a bit stronger. And as I mentioned, they do set up that she is someone that had a near-death experience. During my undergrad, I had classes with someone that had a pretty horrific near-death experience, very similar to Sydney Sweeney's character went through in the film. And the way that they described it was very horrific. It was very much this sense of them being aware that they had passed over and then being brought back to life and being brought back to just our reality after going through that and having passed over, and I guess seeing what's on the other side. It was a very jarring experience. They just felt overall very depressed, and they spoke about how they did have to go on a spiritual journey in order to find any kind of peace after that. So it would have been interesting if they leaned into a little bit more of that with her character, and again, maybe have more of this like psychological component. I don't know. Again, it just goes to my overall problem with this film, where it's setting up really interesting things. It just doesn't really do much with them. So my other biggest gripe with this film is that it relied so heavily on jump scares. And to me, like, I'm not a jump scare person. It just feels cheap. Again, I feel like they had a really great setting. They could have really done something very atmospheric with this movie, but yeah, just jump scares. So those are my overall thoughts on Immaculate. Again, I didn't hate it, but it's not a film that I feel like I'm gonna go back to at any point. We'll see how The First Omen compares, because it seems like the narrative in that film and the narrative in Immaculate are very similar. I was on Reddit the other day and my algorithm gave me like a promo for The First Omen. It was one of those trailers where they have like the infrared shots of the audience like reacting to the horror movie, and they're all like jumping and like pretending to be scared. Usually when they have to go that route to promote a film, not always a great sign. But this one I was laughing because it wasn't even like a theater of people. It was just like people that were in some random room that were just jumping and reacting to something that was coming at them. I don't even know if they were watching the movie.
These terrifying audiences everywhere.
It looked like they were at like, I don't know, a bus stop or just like some random like amusement park ride. And I was like, okay, Paramount. Is it Paramount? That's how you're choosing to market this movie? Like, you can't even get a real like audience, or at least use stock footage of an audience watching something. So that's what we get. That's what we have to look forward to with The First Omen in a couple of weeks. So that's all my thoughts for today. Did you see Immaculate? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I will talk to you next time. Thank you so much for watching.